Hey there everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist, and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first novel. Now on my channel, I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, and that's the characters, and the heart of the characters is in their psychology. So that's the angle I like to take with pretty much everything I do on my channel. So today, this is a trope diagnosis, but it is also a special trope diagnosis. It's one I actually mentioned several weeks ago when I was talking with some friends on several of my writers' groups. And that is, now this topic is pretty close to my heart because my husband has albinism. And so I didn't want to just talk about how this trope is used. I wanted to give you guys information on how you can do it more accurately. So my husband has generously agreed to come on screen with me. So this is my hubby. This is Steven. And like I said, he agreed to do this video with me because he has albinism. So I'm just going to start with just the simple, straightforward question. What the hell is albinism?
Albinism is a genetic disorder that actually affects most organisms on Earth, especially mammalian organisms, but also reptiles, lizards. Almost any animal you can think of that's at a higher order has some sort of albinism. And basically, when somebody is developed, there's a gene that creates a coloring agent called melanin. It is in everything: your eyes, your skin, your hair. And albinism is that mutation where the melanin gene doesn't the gene doesn't create melanin. So basically, my body doesn't create pigment or color.
Okay.
On the basis level, that's what an albino, or that's what a person or an animal with albinism is. So that's why most people with albinism have white hair. Or an animal, if you see an animal that has albinism, like a white lion, or most of the time those are animals with albinism. There are animals that are white, like white tigers, that do not have albinism. They're just naturally colored that way. There are really light colored lions that are, but animals that normally have a very dark color and are born yellow or white, albinos have albinism.
Okay. So the trope I'm talking about today is commonly known as the evil albino, which is essentially this trope in movies, books, any kind of media, where the bad guy has albinism. So why is this an issue?
So I've actually researched this a lot. As a kid, I had a lot of problems being made fun of as an albino or having albinism. But basically, it goes back to silent movies, where westerns it was the black hat, white hat. The bad guy wore the black hat, the good guy wore the white hat. It was a way to easily distinguish characters between the protagonist and the antagonist. Once movies got more sophisticated, color, sound, they needed other ways to identify characters that were the antagonist. And so a lot of times they do that by introducing a character with traits of albinism: really light hair, light skin, light eyes, those kind of things. So it's an easy cinematic tool. It's an easy storytelling tool to distinguish the good guy from the bad guy. So, but it all goes back to, if you look at the old westerns, the good guy wore the white hat, the bad guy wore the black hat. And that's basically where this whole trope came from.
Okay, so it's a very clear visual distinction, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's lazy. I think it's a lazy way of distinguishing between a good guy and a bad guy. You can just say, oh, look, that guy, he's the genetic freak, or he's the odd man out or the odd woman out, and so they're the bad guy.
Okay. Well, something I've seen too that seems to get a lot of emphasis, and I'm not I'm not sure if we have numbers on this or not. The bad guy is white and he has red or pink eyes. Now I know some albinos have pink eyes, but it's not that many, is it?
I've been told by so many people out in public that I'm not an albino or I don't have albinism. I'm sorry, I keep switching back and forth with that. So I do it too, but the really un PC thing to do is call somebody an albino. It would be like saying, "Hey wheelchair," or "Hey blind," or "Hey muscular dystrophy." You don't really want to identify somebody by their disorder, but I do it too all the time, just because
Mm-hmm.
it's such. So you hear me keep it going back and forth. The real PC way to say it is somebody with albinism, or they have traits of albinism. But even I have trouble with that sometimes because it's so long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm sorry, what were we?
That's okay. I was talking about one thing that people like to do with the
Oh,
bad
the
guys,
pink
the pink
eyes, the pink
eyes.
eyes. So yeah, so people have told me, "Oh, you're not albino because you don't have pink eyes," and I'll joke around them like, "Oh, thank God." I've gone 36 years thinking I'm an albino and I'm not an albino. What? How can I thank you? And then I joke, I bring humor into it because at an early age I learned how to kind of turn kids making fun of me, turning my condition, making jokes about it before they could was kind of the defense mechanism. It's probably not the most healthy defense mechanism, but it is one I used.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Very rarely do albinos have people with albinism. See, I just did it again. Have pink eyes. They have pink eyes because the color of their iris is non-existent, and it's actually the blood behind the eye that's coloring it. Um, most people with albinism have blue eyes. I have blue eyes. Most people are born with blue eyes, and then your body produces that color I talked about, melanin, and then melanin produces pigment, and then your eyes are colored either blue, brown, whatever color your eyes are. So it's a very rare trait, and people with albinism with pink eyes are usually have a lot more severe visual impairments. So
Okay.
no, not all people with albinism have pink eyes. Actually, it's very rare. I've only met maybe I think one or two. I've probably in my lifetime met 10, 15 people. They're not real common here in Arizona because it's kind of a really not smart place for people with albinism to live. But
Okay. So, how prevalent is this evil albino trope? I mean, I know you probably have examples. I know that you've talked about a couple of movies and books. It's like, oh my god, I hate this.
I mean, I guess you have to go with how prevalent are people with albinism anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the numbers are between 1 in 17,000 and 1 in 20,000. They're more prominent in certain places. Africa has one of the highest instances of albinism in the world, and it's just because people are the carriers for it. I guess we'll come back to that question and going back to kind of the science of it.
Okay.
So, about 1 in 70 people are a carrier for the recessive gene that is required for your child to be have albinism. Both parents have to have it, so both my parents had it. But as far back as we can trace, I mean, well, we did the lineage on my dad's family back to the 1400s in Sweden, and we found no familial history of anybody with albinism.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's side doesn't go back as far, only to my great grandparents. Thank you, USSR, for that. But again, there's no familial history of albinism in my family. So, as far as we know, I'm the first one in our family. So, I mean, if you have somebody that's 1 in 17,000, 1 in 20,000, it's not going to be common. But as far as like movies, anime, books, TV shows, it is very common. I'm a Trekkie. As you can see, we're kind of nerds. Big Star Trek fan. I know that on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there's an albino Klingon. He's a bad guy. I guess I don't. I haven't watched Discovery yet, but I guess in Discovery, there's the main antagonist is a Klingon again, and he's an albino
And
or has albinism.
I think he's the son of
Son of No One is
Son of
called
No
or
One,
something.
yeah.
So, but I mean, I have a whole huge list here. I mean, let me find it because we were looking it up just to get the facts. I mean, we have movies, TV shows. You know, you can look up actually lists online, and so these are ones that are really very stereotypical, very common to the, like I said, what I think is the lazy trope. So we have the Da Vinci Code, the Monk, um, the Matrix Reloaded, the Twins, Village of the Damned, All the Kids. Now I have to mention in this one, so not all characters that have albinism. Like in the Village of the Damned, the children are aliens or part alien. Sorry, spoiler alert. But they have very blonde hair, very white hair, very light skin. Some of them have pink eyes. So even though they are part alien, they're a lot of these characters are. They may not say outright that they have albinism, but it is very obvious that they do. You know that they're still using that character trope.
The traits.
Yeah. One of our favorite is the Game of Thrones. The Targaryens are described as having blonde or white hair, being crazy. You know, I mean, so
Violet
again,
eyes.
we can't say that George R. R. Martin never came out and said that they have albinism or they are albinos, but you can draw your own conclusions.
But and also they practice incest a lot, which would make sense for that gene to get passed down. So that makes sense.
Have you ever seen The Heat? The albino DEA agent. Again, he's not an antagonist, but the characters describe him as they thought he was the bad guy because he's creepy as fuck. He's has all these traits. So they even say in the movie, I thought you were the bad guy because you're the albino. So I mean, again, they're even bringing up the trope in the movie. Let's see. The X-Files, Cold Mountain, the anime Berserk, the anime Kill la Kill. I don't know a lot of these. We looked them up the other night. And the list goes on. The Princess Bride. The character is just known as the albino, and he works in the pit of despair. The Harry Potter movies, the World Grindelwald. Again, he's not. J.K. Rowling, I don't believe, ever called him an albino or said he had albinism, but Johnny Depp plays this character with white hair, white skin, blue eyes, so you kind of have to, same thing with Hellboy 2, Prince Nawada. The elves, they kind of have like an albino-ish quality to them. Mad Max, Immortan Joe. You brought up this one, Moby Dick. He's the great white whale, let's see. Now these are the books: Alara Unbroken, Chronicles of Ancient Darkness, Children of the Red King, Dark is Rising. So these are all characters, and this is just a short list. There's a huge list of TV shows and characters and stuff. Now I will say the one albino antagonist that I look up to is Azog the Defiler in Tolkien's The Hobbit series. Does he bring him up in the books, or is it just the movies?
Yeah, he's in the books. He's just he's very briefly mentioned in the books. The movies expanded his role significantly, but he is mentioned in the books, and he is called the White Orc. So,
and obviously in the movies, you can see he's very pale. The orcs are usually very dark skinned. But he's very pale. But I like him, and I'll tell you why. Because he's not like, I guess a lot of these bad guys, or these antagonists, they're feeble, there's something wrong with them. There's just something off, But hey, he's a really strong character. He's smart, he's strategic, he's tough. And I got to meet the actor at can't call it Comic-Con anymore, Phoenix Fan Fest. We both got to meet the actor Manu Bennett, who plays Azog. And I brought, a figure for him to sign, because again, like I said, we're nerds. We hang our nerd flag high and proud. And I told him that, I really admired his portrayal of Azog because he is such a strong character. And you don't usually see that. You know, Klingons are very strong characters. But like in Deep Space Nine, the albino Klingon is very feeble and, uses his brain instead of, like these. I mean, because, the Klingons are big, strong warrior characters, and you don't see that in him. It's the traits are totally different. So I really liked the character of Azog, and that's kind of rare for me to like a character with albinism, just because I don't think they're portrayed in. I mean, Azog is a antagonist you can like. He's that character that you're almost rooting for,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had him sign my figure, saying from one badass albino to another, and he even took a selfie with me because he's like, "Oh, you're a real albino," you're. So I told him thank you though. I said, you did an awesome portrayal. That is really cool for me. That's something I can say. Oh, he was an albino orc. I mean, he was. He or an orc with albinism. So I guess I mean. So as you can see, it's a very prominent trait, a very trope.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, if you're gonna make someone with albinism a bad guy, make him a badass bad guy.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at the list though of good guys, it's almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, from like my point of view, like I said before, I was made fun of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the world we live in, books, movies, stories shape how we look at things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you portray people with albinism in a dark light every single time, and you give them traits, genetic
Maldeformations.
maldeformities,
We'll go with that.
or make them feeble or evil, or then that's going to affect how people look at people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know that we looked at the actual crime statistics. So there's a huge. I don't know if you want to jump in this early.
We can go with this.
In Africa right now, there literally thousands of people with albinism are being murdered every day. We looked at what in August. What was the numbers?
I wrote it down. I think it's like March of.
Oh, March. I'm sorry. So.
Oh, here it is. So of August of last year, 150 were killed in South Africa. Just South Africa.
Just South Africa. Now Tanzania is really the hot spot for it. Basically, what is happening is different cultures around the world believe that albinism occurs for different reasons. And in a lot of cultures in Africa, they believe that albinism happens because a child is cursed, or even that they have magical properties. And so these children and adults are murdered, mutilated. We looked it up. A person with albinism's body is worth $75,000 US in Africa right now. All the body parts. An arm or a leg you can sell for $2,000. There's a really horrible story that I read about a while ago, and for the life of me, I couldn't find it. But twin girls in Tanzania were eating dinner with their family, and a group of men crashed their truck into the front of their house, kidnapped these little girls, and I believe they were between 8 and 10, so not very old. And they found them later, but just basically their torsos, their arms, legs, eyes, head, everything was gone. And sold to witch doctors. Or I don't want to say witch doctors because I guess that's not PC either. But the spiritual people of these different cultures believe the eyes, the arms, because I mean you have to look at most of the population of Africa is very dark skinned, and then you have these babies, these children, these people born that have very light skin. Now we know now that it's because of that genetic mutation, that melanin. So basically, people with very dark skin have a lot of melanin. They have a lot of pigment in their skin. We were looking at when these babies are born. A lot of times, the mothers are looked at as being doing infidelity. They think that they cheated on their husbands, because this baby was born white. They looked at the families are being cursed. A lot of times, the families that we looked at are abandoned by their tribes or by their groups. And left to just fend on their own. A lot of families kill the children when they're born because of this stigma that is attached to it. So you have to look at, we have to, and there are very large groups trying to educate people on this isn't a curse. This isn't, supernatural, but I mean, but how do you, educate a bunch of people that don't understand genetics. How do you? There's a very large soccer team of kids and adults with albinism that go around and try to educate people. But I mean, we're looking at just months ago
Hmm.
in one small country. 107. So I mean, if you imagine 1 in 17,000, 1 in 20,000, 120 people. I mean, that could be almost an entire country's population of people with albinism.
Hmm.
And then you were reading about now some countries in Africa are putting the families and the people with albinism in basically these little ghettos. I say ghetto, referring to what the German military did during World War II with the Jewish populations. They put them in basically a ghetto is a sealed off city area. Basically, they're doing it so that they can be protected. So they say, but also it's putting all of them in one place and making them targets. So I mean, but I think that the only way to really change this is if people start really portraying people with albinism. I mean, if you want to make a person with albinism your bad guy, go for it. I mean, that's cool. That's fine. Just don't, use the albinism as a trope so that people will know you're bad guy. You know what I mean?
Okay, so like you said, right now there's almost no good guys with albinism, or very, very few. There's a ton of antagonists and bad guys. So we need to level the playing field a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, if you look up the list, just go to Google and just put in, albino antagonist. And you'll find these websites that people have literally just gathered information. I mean, and sometimes, it's over 100 long.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to me, that isn't fair representation. I mean, if you started taking, it'd be like if everybody started taking one ethnic group. So if you started making all Caucasians bad guys. Kind of like what they do with, I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of bad guys in American movies are British.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that.
So same thing though. I mean, that isn't, I mean, if you want to put British characters in your stories, go for it, but don't just put them as the antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have some, but I mean, that's just one of the ones I can think of off the top of my head. And I'll tell you, the one movie that affected me the most, and this character is not an albino either, and I will go to my grave saying this. This movie caused the most pain and suffering for me as a child. The movie Powder. In the movie Powder, I don't know if you've seen it. Something happens when he's born. His mother's struck by lightning, or something happens. Basically, he's born. He doesn't have any hair on his whole body. He's pale white. So people automatically think, he's an albino. But I mean, so many kids at school would ask me, because in the movie he can move metal objects and do all kinds of weird things because his mother was struck by lightning. So he's some kind of energy being in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know, that gave me the hardest time. And how I really got around that was my mom would talk to the teachers, and we're talking second grade, third grade. At the beginning of every school year, I would just stand up and just explain why I look the way I do. The schools I went to were very heavy Hispanic populations. But you know what? Once I explained the reason I was, because we're afraid of what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, once I explained, why I am the way I am, why I look the way I do, then it got better,
Okay. So if writers are going to be putting people with albinism in their stories, what are traits that people with albinism do have that they need to keep in mind?
Okay, so most people with albinism have a few things. One is eye problems. I always am looking very closely at papers and stuff. People are, oh, you need to get your eyes checked. You need to get glasses. Well, actually, it's that lack of melanin in my eyes. Couple things. Melanin helps with, or pigment helps with binocular vision, depth perception. So I have almost no depth perception. How that affects me is like when I'm going downstairs and there's no markers, it almost looks flat to me. So I have to walk downstairs a very special way. I am legally blind, so in my good eye, I have 2200 vision. People with albinism usually are very light sensitive. That's why they're usually wearing sunglasses outside. When I say light sensitive, it's not I'm totally blind outside. It's not that I can't go outside without sunglasses. It's just usually my right eye closes and it's just very hard for me to see. But on the flip side of that, I can see very well at night because my eyes are so light sensitive.
Mhm.
So I mean, usually there's some kind of, but that varies. Sometimes people with albinism have very little to no eye problems, and we were talking about the different types of albinism. People can just have albinism of the skin, or people can just have albinism of the eyes. There are people with albinism that have red or dark brown hair. It's such a varied. There's 4 different genes that they've identified that can cause this. So each one, there's 4 types of albinism. So I would suggest if you're going to decide on doing a character with albinism, look up what the 4 types are, and they actually go through and explain, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 look like this, or have this trait, or is most common or least common. The type I have is called oculocutaneous, so basically skin and eyes. That's one of the most common, and one of the most noticeable. As you can see, my hair is very light, my beard is very light. I have, so I guess that we get, because we have no melanin or pigment in our skin, we have no protection from the sun. So we don't spend a lot of time outside. If we do, like today I was out, I'm a little pink. I've had skin cancer more times than I can count. Because again, that melanin, that pigment protects your skin. Even if you're very fair skinned, you have some that's protecting you, and that's where you get tan, is that melanin, that pigment is getting brown, it's getting burned. We don't have that. We don't have that. So we have no protection. So, I mean, I guess that's, so I mean, somebody with oculocutaneous can have very light hair, very light skinned. It can be anything from pink to white to very white. Um, I know in the United States, a lot of African Americans that have albinism are very noticeable, just because they have very yellow hair. So I mean, everyone is different. It's like with any genetic disorder. There's a spectrum. There's a varying degree. So I mean, there are some people with albinism that are blind. Their eyes are totally useless. Because of this. I'm lucky to have very workable vision. So.
So I know that one of the things we looked up, there was a albinism of just the eyes, and it was called X-linked, some kind of X-linked factor, because it was only passed on the X chromosome, and so then it would only really show up in males more often than females.
So yeah, like we were talking about before, both parents have to have the recessive gene, and then after that, it's still. So if my parents had decided to have another biologic child, it was a 25% chance because they both had it.
Mm-hmm.
But only 1 in 70 people carry the recessive gene. So that's why there's not very many, because both parents have to have that recessive gene, and then it's only a 25% chance after that. Genetics math is very hard. I don't completely understand it, but
genetics is complicated.
I just know, so that's why I have no familial history of any family members with albinism. It just happened that, all the people that had children, one pair either had it and it didn't come out, or one pair didn't have it. But there is some, like you said, that X-linked one where basically it's coming from the father, but because it's a recessive gene, the mother would still have to have something there. But again, it would be very rare and it would only be in males. So, I mean, I would suggest just educate yourself, look it up. There's a ton of information out there. We looked up Mayo Clinic they had a huge depository of information. I mean, so I would just say look up reputable sources. WebMD, World Health Organization, the UN has a bunch of stuff. So I would just say just accurately portray them.
Okay.
Let's get away from they're genetic freaks.
Okay. And I think before I end this, because we're coming up on a half hour now, so you've mentioned it to me before, and you said that when you were in Boy Scouts and you worked with the Native American tribes, one of the things that you found encouraging was their legend of the White Buffalo Woman.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, different cultures in the world portray albinism in different ways. A lot of the African cultures, they're looked at as cursed or even mystical. The Native Americans are the same way. There are a lot of tribes, mostly plains tribes, but also into the Southwest, that believe in the legend of the white buffalo woman. And a white buffalo is uh, American bison that has albinism. Um, and they believe that she came to give them their ceremonies. So they look at her as a deity figure. And so when a white buffalo calf is born, it is sacred to them. It's a very sacred thing because it's the embodiment of that deity. And that deity brought, the ceremonies for them to be able to do the things that they needed to do to get the help that they needed. If you ever want to look it up, it's a really interesting legend. I love that story. It's just called. Just look up the White Buffalo Woman. There's different varying stories. It's actually one of those ones that crosses a bunch of different tribes. So, but I mean, they look at it as something very special. Unfortunately, they don't think that there are any more true American bison albino or albinism. All the ones that have been born have had cow DNA in them too. They're called beefaloes. So it's kind of sad because we, again, took the bison herds down to under 30 before we turned around and saved them. So, the chances of, I don't know, the prominence of the recessive gene in bison, American bison. I'm saying American bison because there are a lot of people consider buffalo like water buffalo or,
Mhm.
So I mean, it's kind of sad that may not even exist anymore. There might not be any truly genetically pure American bison that have albinism. But there are some that are born and they look exactly like buffalo. You can't tell the difference between them unless you do like a genetic test. But so I mean, yeah. So they look at it as a deity figure. I mean, it's a very sacred thing to them.
Okay. Well, I think that's good unless you have something else you wanted to add. So, guys, thank you for chiming in and thank you, hubby, for talking with me.
I didn't really have a choice. Happy wife, happy life.
You had a choice, but you did it anyway. So, like I said, and like Steven said, if you want to make your antagonist have albinism, that's fine. But let's be fair about it and let's start adding in some more protagonists that have albinism. Let's add in some more side characters. And if you're going to make a bad guy have albinism, let's at least make him a badass bad guy and competent.
I mean, if they ever have any questions, just submit questions, I guess, through you, and then
Oh yeah, no problem.
I'll
If
be
you
glad to
guys
answer them.
if you guys need some advice or just want to get some feedback, feel free to drop me a message either here or I have my social media links below. And as always, thank you guys for chiming in, and I will see you guys next time.
Knowing is half the battle.
The other half is half red lasers, half blue lasers.